missed the point to a degree when we talk this way. First of all, I'm afraid I think a number of Palestinians, more than just children, are pleased by this event, but that's a different matter, though we need to keep it in mind as we think about how we deal with Palestine in the future. But the fundamental point here is, if you have played with terrorism, if you are a part of it one way or another, if you have been involved in this whole effort of creating a terrorist state, if you will, and creating the kind of atmosphere in which you can train these people and get them to do these sorts of acts, then I think it's more than time for the United States to decide that terrorism and terrorists, whether they are immediately involved in this issue or not, are our public enemy. They have threatened our national security, and we need to start dealing with terrorism and terrorists as a coordinated bunch, even though they may not always be so. It is time we made it clear to the rest of the world we simply, to the degree we can affect it, are not going to tolerate it anymore.
Lawrence Eagleburger, thank you very much.
All right, we take it now to correspondent Molly Falconer. She has been in one of the, well, she's been on ground zero, so to speak, where some of the wounded have been taken right after the collapse of the World Trade Center. We have Molly with us live. Molly?
Hey, Linda, we just finished up a briefing with New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani and Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik. They gave us the latest on the situation, and they still won't put a number on the number of dead and injured. They've been pouring in here to St. Vincent's Hospital, right where most of the wounded are coming. Many are burned. Some have suffered heart attacks, others smoke inhalation. A lot of the people who have been critically injured, 3 have died since we were here this morning and started bringing you our coverage. Many of them are rescue workers, and the mayor was quick to point out that they are interested in saving as many people as they can right now. That is the emphasis of this entire citywide effort going on with what has happened. Now, if you look around me right now, you can see what was the Family Information Center and just people who are on standby, gurneys out in the street, what has been out there all morning. We hear that there are 260 plus inside the hospital. A makeshift morgue, we have just learned, has been set up a few blocks away, but they are not releasing the location of that yet. We have had some hysterical bystanders who have been hauled away by police. The police are not taking any nonsense around here this morning. We've had a couple people try and break through these barricades that encircle St. Vincent's Hospital. They need to get the patients in and out. They are not taking anything that is anyway in the least out of the ordinary lightly. We saw the police haul someone away. We're also hearing that the mental health hotlines are busy. The rescue workers, the main injuries are they're getting corneal abrasions, we have just heard, because the debris from downtown is falling on top of them, and their eyes are getting scratched. Right now, all emergency personnel, we have heard, are getting helmets, plastic glass wrapped around their heads if they are working downtown, because there is a concern about asbestos, there is a concern about toxicity, and a lot of these rescue workers are getting scraped up. There was a blood shortage here that is under control. They're asking for type O positive. Also, there have been medical shortages as well. Hospital personnel have been going out into the streets to local pharmacies asking them for all the burn medications they have. And if you look over here to my left, you can see some of the hospital workers and some of the 18-wheelers that just got trucked in here this morning to try and get as much medical supplies onto the premises as possible. The ambulances, as you can hear, even though this tragedy occurred hours ago, still going on. They are still coming into this hospital, already working at capacity. We hear the hospital gym has been made into a makeshift ER, as many of the hospitals. There are many as 500 doctors and nurses inside working around the clock. They have a disaster alert on. They're also asking for clothing and shoes from possible donors, because many of the victims have had their clothes blown right off them. We'll give you the latest as we know it. A next update is coming within the hour. Back to you.
Molly Falconer at St. Vincent's Hospital, where the injured have been taken, many injured, of course, and many dead as the rescue and search and rescue gets underway down at the World Trade Center. On the joining us now from Capitol Hill, Carl Cameron, keeping an eye on congressional leaders as they met today to size this thing up. Carl.
Hi, John. Well, in fact, they're meeting as we speak behind closed doors in the Capitol Police headquarters just off to my left, the right of people's television screens. A bit of a media encampment here as U.S. senators and members of Congress get national security briefings from the FBI, CIA, National Security Council, various different security officials trying to give them an update. And there is a movement afoot between both Republicans and Democrats, particularly in the Senate, to reconvene Congress later this evening. If nothing else, just as a symbolic gesture of American unity and courage that the American people will not be deterred by these apparent terrorist attacks that took place earlier today. The leadership, Tom Daschle, the majority leader, the Democrat in the U.S. Senate, and the House Speaker, Dennis Hastert, the Republican, are in a secure location sort of off campus. They are not at the Capitol, but most of the other senators and congressmen did in fact stay on Capitol Hill, even though the Capitol building itself was evacuated shortly after the planes struck the World Trade Towers in New York City. So as we speak, ongoing briefings and both a political and a symbolic national security decision being made by lawmakers here as to whether or not they will reconvene Congress before the end of today, sometime later tonight perhaps, as a gesture to those apparent terrorists and the world that the U.S. government goes ahead undeterred. John, Linda?
Carl, I got to ask you, is there talk of retribution? Is there talk of striking back? Is there talk of figuring out, even though we didn't know this one was coming, maybe figuring out exactly who's responsible and hitting back?
Oh, absolutely. The rhetoric that one hears from lawmakers talking about this as deplorable and despicable is evident. I'm going to try to put Anne-Marie Willis, our camera person, through her paces here. Forgive us for the quality of this shot because we have some arriving dignitaries as part of this upcoming security briefing. You see, obviously, a large contingent of Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, various officials as they prepare for yet another dignitary to arrive here. About 25...
On the West Coast, you are watching KCPQ TV, Seattle, Tacoma, Everett. There will be no regular programming until 11 p.m. Back here live, we want to help you understand what's going on in Western Washington. Number one, the blood donations that have been pouring in.
Yeah, New York City, there's a tremendous demand, as you can imagine, with the injuries and death in New York City for blood. If you would like to help out, go to your local blood center and donate. And Christy Paulo is joining us live from the newsroom here at Q13. And I understand they've been inundated at the Seattle Blood Center, right, Christy?
They have, Sam and Christine. The enormity of this event and the number of people injured could put some pressure on the nation's blood supply. The Red Cross has not yet called for emergency donations, but officials are saying that if you have an appointment to give blood today, most certainly keep that appointment. It especially needs type O blood. Type O is the universal blood that anyone can receive, and Seattle area residents certainly are responding. On a normal day, the Downtown Blood Center receives about 40 donations. Today, it's received upward of 300 donations from people anxious to help out.
Someone said, let's go get blood, and we're like, great, we can at least do something.
I wanted to feel like I was doing something to help, and I have cousins in New York, and haven't been able to contact them. So instead of sitting at home and watching the news and go crazy, I just decided to do something about it.
And if you would like information about where you can donate, you can call the blood bank at 1-800-398-7888. The number is there on your screen, or you can log on to www.psbc.org for more information. And again, type O blood is the universal blood, so if that is your blood type, you might want to consider going down to your local blood bank and donating.
Okay, type O blood. Thank you very much. Christy Paulus reporting live from the newsroom on blood donations.
Let's head out to SeaTac Airport. It, like so many airports across the country, has been shut down today. Here is Chris Daniels joining us by phone. Good morning, or good afternoon, rather, Chris.
And good afternoon, Sam. We're currently awaiting a press conference with Bob Parker, the spokesperson for SeaTac Airport. What we can tell you now is we're kind of waiting to see how this all sorts out for tomorrow. United Airlines spokesman telling me here at the airport that no flights of theirs will be taking off until at least 10 a.m. tomorrow. What we had heard earlier from Bob Parker is there was a specific edict from the FAA that no flights would be allowed in or out of SeaTac Airport until at least 7 a.m. tomorrow, and that was a specific edict from the FAA about SeaTac Airport. At last check, we had heard there was a security sweep ongoing of the airfield of SeaTac, and that after that sweep was done, that they would suspend all movement on that airfield. Right now, all flights that were en route to SeaTac have been rerouted to Vancouver, BC's airport or to other airports in Canada. Again, we're waiting an update right now from Bob Parker, and I'm going to step into that press conference right now, Sam.
Okay, we'll let you go then, Chris Daniels. Thank you very much. Again, SeaTac Airport has been shut down. He indicated that there is a sweep going on there, and again, the hour rather now has been pushed back. They had hoped to get things going by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Now it looks like, Christine, it's going to be 10 a.m. before things are back up to speed.
It's amazing to think about. This is the first time the FAA has ordered a national ground stop like this, and of course you just heard that affects SeaTac as well. Some good news a little bit. The Capitol reopened about a half an hour ago. The Puyallup Fair is still going strong, although the Maya concert has been canceled for tonight. We also do want to tell you that the Space Needle and most major Seattle area businesses and malls are closed right now until further notice. That is the latest word here.
The Mariners will not be playing in Anaheim tonight. The Major League Baseball schedule has been suspended at least for a day, and we don't know how much longer that will last. On the bottom of your screen is a ticker. It is providing the latest local information in terms of what this devastation and this disaster is doing to Western Washington, what's closed, what's canceled. Ferry services, by the way, shut down for cars because they're worried about car bombs. So,
with the exception of the San Juan Islands and Vashon Island as well. So as people continue to gather information about the devastation that has occurred, mostly in the East Coast, and also with some of the things that have been happening as a result across the country, now some of the leaders of the country are also considering what happens next. And some of the leaders of Congress have been taken to a secure place. The president has been taken to a secure place, as has been the First Lady.
This has been a local update. We are here at 25 after and 5 minutes to. Every hour on the half hour, we will bring you the latest live local update. You are watching KCPQ TV. It is Seattle, Everett, and Tacoma where we are broadcasting. We will be back again in another half hour. We return now to national coverage.
The left tower there, the one that was on smoke, not the one that was hit by that plane, Tower 1, will be closed tomorrow as well. This is the first time in stock market history they have been closed this long in the event of a national disaster. But the New York Stock Exchange saying it will not open for business. This is as much technical as anything else. The lines that allow for something called cross-trading between the various exchanges and the futures markets, this all seems arcane, are down because the World Trade Center is no more. So there is no effective way now to trade stocks or futures. You can't trade in the metals, you can't trade in the oils. And the better part of valor for a lot of these guys earlier today, those who had connections to foreign markets, was to bid up the price of oil and gold, John. And in fact, those were rocketing today as really one of the few places, or a couple of the few places, to put their cash. But the financial markets, as much really representative of symbolically what's going on here, will not be open tomorrow either. So whoever committed this heinous act today, if the gist was not only to cause tremendous physical damage and obviously a tremendous loss of life, they have also cut the financial capital of the world to the core. It will not be open for business. Indications are now, we're told, from New York Stock Exchange officials, that they will try for Thursday morning at the normal time. But keep in mind this will affect global trading because everything pretty much hinges on the big boy in town, New York. Again, the major exchanges closed today. They will be closed again tomorrow.
Neil, the exchanges, the major corporations that are in that building must know something about the survival of their own people. Is any word leaking out from those companies that had hundreds, if not thousands, in that building, what they think or know about the fate of their employees?
Well, you know, it's a good question, John. I wish I could tell you because I have a lot of close friends, many I've known for the past 20 years in my reporter days, having frequently gone to those two towers, who I cannot contact, and I've tried the better part of the day to get in touch with them. We've gotten no word from Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter. We've gotten no word from a lot of folks I know at the New York Mercantile Exchange who trade in the oils and the futures markets that set the price of even the gasoline that we get at the pumps many times. No word from our folks at Cantor Fitzgerald, the big financial services firm, or Keefe Bruyette Woods, the big financial services concern, or Allstate Insurance. No indication as yet how far or extensive the damage was, or how people we've routinely had on this network and on my show over the past 5 years of this network and many years before that are even alive. So when these huge institutions, which play a vital role in the world capital markets, are not being heard from, you always fear for the worst. You hope for the best, but you fear for the worst. And I got to tell you, John, I have many, many dear and close friends and associates and contacts none of whom I've heard from today.
You know, Anil, we're going to hear a lot more about this in the next couple of days, and we're hoping for the best for everybody. Linda.
Also there is movement from the President of the United States. He apparently has wrapped up a National Security Council meeting that he was conducting via phone at Offutt Air Force Base. There you see Air Force One in the air. He is headed back to the White House. We learned from Karen Hughes, senior advisor to the President, that Vice President Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice were already at a secure facility inside the White House, as are other senior White House staffers. Apparently, it has been decided that the President will go back there, join them as they continue to formulate a response to this. Another key player here, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, he is not at the White House. He is at the Pentagon, even though there was a plane crash earlier there today. His office specifically not affected, so he remains there. But again, after finishing up a National Security Council meeting via secure phone at Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, the President now is en route back to Washington, D.C., presumably headed toward the White House to that secure facility where Vice President Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice are already waiting.
Linda, joining us now, Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, who is on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator, thanks very much for joining us. We evidently didn't know this was coming. Does that mean we won't be able to find out who did it?
Well, for one thing, I hope there's a wake-up call here, John, because, you know, ever since in the last 10 years of the decimation of our military, along with that is the intelligence budget. So we don't have the intelligence that we need. And I think that that's going to be a response to this tragedy, is that we're going to start rebuilding both our defense system and our intelligence. You got to keep in mind that anyone who would fly an airplane into the World Trade Center would also deploy a missile at the United States. We're dealing with that kind of a mentality. So I hope this serves as a wake-up call to start a massive rebuilding of our defense system and our intelligence system.
Senator, it is not, earlier we heard from the chief representative of the Palestinian Authority in the United States. He said they didn't have anything to do with it. Maybe you could say, well, gee, it would be kind of tough for the Palestinians to learn how to fly a 757. But it's pretty easy to identify what countries could train people to fly a 757, to fly it into the World Trade Center after it had been hijacked. That list comes to mind to nearly anybody. Is that who we're going to be looking at?
Well, we don't really know. People talk about bin Laden. They talk about the obvious ones out there. One of the things that I would recall to your attention is the footage that you had on Fox News of the Palestinians celebrating the death of these thousands of Americans just a few minutes ago. And as to who has the capability, you know, you can hire that, John. You can. There are people out there on the market who can do that. This was well thought out, and it's one that was the professionals executed.
Well, so what happens? I mean, do we sit here and say, okay, we've got to investigate this and figure out who it is, and then we'll send FBI agents around the world and gather up the suspects and have a 2-year trial and, like Ramzi Youssef, put somebody in jail? Or do we launch our military might?
No, we launch immediately, but you don't know who. People say, is this war? Yeah, it's an active war, but you can't declare a war until you know who the adversary is. We don't know who the adversary is right now. The first thing that has to be done is learn who the adversary is. It's either going to be state-sponsored or not state-sponsored. At least this would be my opinion. And your response would be different in each way. So, yes, we need to act immediately. I think you're going to see that we have a president who's on his way back to Washington as we speak. He was going to be very decisive as soon as we launch everything we can to determine who it is and who's responsible.
All right, Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma on the Senate Armed Services Committee, thanks very much for joining us. Right now we're going to Professor
Barry Levin. He's of the University of California. He is a renowned terrorism expert. As they, of course, the main job here at the White House, or at the White House right now, is to figure out who might be responsible for this massive act of terrorism. Professor, thanks for being with us. You have obviously done a lot of study on any organization that could be responsible, that could have the kind of network that would carry out something like this. Who do you think is prime suspect number one?
Well, there are a handful of organizations. I think, obviously, Osama bin Laden is at the top of the list. Let me just say that we have to look at a couple of things. We have to look at who has a motive. There are tons of people throughout the world who do not like the United States. So there are a bunch of those kind. But who would have the opportunity and the means? That narrows it up a bunch. And I think one of the things that we've been seeing over the last couple of decades has been a decline in state-sponsored terrorism and an increase in these smaller, autonomous, but very well funded and expert organizations like bin Laden. That being said, I'd like to point out that we've been having an air attack going on against Iraq for some time. It hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, but we've been doing overflights practically daily now, so certainly that regime would also possibly have a motive, but right now it's pure speculation. The thing here that I think points to a Middle Eastern connection is the fact that we've seen similar activity like this in the past. Let me give you an example. About a decade ago, there was a plan to blow up 9 American airliners over the Pacific. That was thwarted by our law enforcement and intelligence community. In addition, recently, we've been starting to see an uptick in the anti-American rhetoric, and importantly, too, and this was something that we've noticed throughout those of us who monitor this stuff, that American-related targets were hit in Israel. The Sparrow restaurant was a heavily trafficked tourist destination in a part of Jerusalem that had Americans there. And
all right. Professor, I mean, I understand that, but you have to really narrow it down to which organization. I mean, we're putting pieces together here. Whoever planned this has to have people, number one, who can probably fly planes, but people who are so skilled that they can hijack not 1, but 4 commercial airliners at once. They can get through extensive airport security in Boston, at Dulles Airport in Virginia, at Newark Airport in New Jersey. What kind of organization is that well coordinated that can do this?
Well, I think we have organizations, but the fact of the matter is they have offshoots. So you can have someone who might throw somebody $1 million and say, learn what you have to learn to attack the great Satan, and try and keep enough distance so that it's hard to find out who it is.
Well, let me take you back to this plan when you were talking about a decade ago, and I remember what you're talking about. There was this plan coordinated to blow up 9 American airliners over the Pacific. It was thwarted. Who was behind it?
Fundamentalists from the Middle East.
Okay.
We're behind that. You know, additionally, look, there are a lot of people who don't like the United States, and I think right now, certainly bin Laden's at the top of the list for someone who has this kind of visceral hatred and the kind of money and planning and professionalism behind him, but I don't want to take out of the range of possibilities the fact that there might be intermediaries who might have been funded by someone who has the money, but not as directly connected as you might think. The new face that we're seeing today with terrorism are these terrorists that are not necessarily state-sponsored, but sponsored by mentors like bin Laden and the like.
Professor Brian Levin, terrorism expert at the University of California, thank you.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Pat Robertson, coming to us from, I'm not quite sure where you are, Mr. Robertson.
I'm in Virginia Beach.
All right, good to see you. Of course, I think I know your reaction to this. I would expect your reaction to be a total revulsion. But what do you make of it?
Well, John, you know, we operated a television station in southern Lebanon since 1982 that was overrun by the Hezbollah. We've seen bombings. Our studio was car bombed a couple of times. We've been the victim of a mortar attack, etc. So we've seen these people operate. They were funded out of Iran through Syria. I've been twice with Yasser Arafat. Seen how heavily armed they are in Bethlehem, and I was just over in Israel, you know, at the end of July, and I saw what was necessary. The Israelis are under terrific pressure, and I knew they had to move in against the PLO, and when they did that, we would see Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and these other groups come against America. I knew it. I told our staff on Labor Day that it was going to happen, and it happened just a little bit faster than I thought.
Well, Mr. Robertson, I got to say, the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad, and they can all drive Ryder trucks loaded with bombs. And they can all go in a building with a bomb strapped to them. In this case, one has to believe at this point, until somebody proves it, that a terrorist got behind the yoke of the airplane and flew it into those targets. Who can do that?
Well, if you have $100 million, you can train a lot of pilots, and I think Osama bin Laden has $100 million plus. There is no doubt that the Gulf Arab states are funneling money into terrorist organizations. As a matter of fact, the Hamas is working out of Dallas, Texas. They had a big fundraiser. They take tens of millions of dollars out of the United States, money laundering out of here. So with that kind of money, you can set up training camps, you can hire pilots, and once a extremist gets the idea that if he blows up the great Satan, he's going to spend eternity in paradise with all those pretty women and everything that they promise him, then getting 4 suicide pilots isn't all that tough.
Pat Robertson, we thank you very much for your time. We need to go now to Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut. He's with us on the phone. Senator, we understand that there has been a meeting at the Capitol Hill Police headquarters of some leaders from Congress. What can you tell us?
Oh, there were between 25 and 30 of us members of the Senate who were over there this afternoon after we evacuated the respective office buildings, just following events and talking to one another. And I think it's important to say that, you know, we're united, obviously, across party lines. The country draws together at a moment like this. Our hearts are heavy. Our prayers go out to the families of those that suffered today. And our resolve is strong. And in the end, we reached out and called Senator Daschle and Senator Lott, our leaders. We expressed those feelings to them, and we urge them to bring us back in a session as soon as is possible from a security point of view, not for a legislative matter, a big open debate, but just to make clear, not to the American people, but also to those who have struck us today, that we may have been hit, but the American government, it's on its feet, and we're together, and we're going to go forward together and find who did this and make them pay for it.
Some individual lawmakers have called this an act of war. Is there a consensus among you?
Well, we live in such a strange age that it's hard to declare an act of war when you don't know who struck you yet. But by every measurement of what we know as war, and even looking back over our history, we have never been hit like this before. You'd have to go back, I think, somebody said to me earlier, to the War of 1812 to think about attacks in Washington. And of course, sadly, the deaths that resulted today are probably greater than that. This really is another day that will live in infamy.
Is there a plan for Congress to go back to some level of work tomorrow just to show that the United States government has not been shut down despite these attacks?
Yes, indeed. That's the last we heard from our leaders, and we're all, very few of us left the Hill, though we left the Capitol in our office buildings. And we're ready to go back at a moment's notice whenever the security agencies tell us it's safe to do so. That's the message we want to send out to America, that you know, we're a strong nation and we're going forward. Our hearts are heavy, but we're resolved to show these enemies of America that we're here and strong.
Senator Lieberman, we're here, but maybe as many as 10,000 of our fellow Americans aren't. It is a huge, huge number.
Hard to imagine, really, that this happened.
And it seems to cry out for action, not for investigation, and not for apprehension, and not for trial, and not for jail, but for action.
Right.
What action would you recommend?
Well, that's the complexity of this horrible situation. Obviously, first, you know, if you compare it to Pearl Harbor, we knew who attacked, and we responded. We declared war. Here, we don't really know yet who did this, but as soon as we find out...
Senator Lieberman, I apologize for interrupting you. We have news coming out of Israel. The Israeli government now speaking about these terrorist attacks. Shimon Peres at the podium explaining what's going on. Let us go there. I understand he's with us now. Mr. Peres, thank you for being with us.
Yes.
What is the Israeli government response to this? Who do you believe is responsible?
We feel that we have to handle every source of terror to identify countries that host or supports terror or terrorism and declare them as countries of terror. I think we have to turn to all the religious leaders to denounce suicidal terrorists. Look the damage they brought. And then our heart is with the United States. Each of us feels today like being an American. Our heart are with the families with the wounded people. But in spite of it, may I say, America paid a very high price, but America remained the only country that can save the world from this terrible jungle-like introduction.
Sir, it was reported. Sir, it was reported earlier today that the Israeli government believed that this was the work of Osama bin Laden. Is that true?
No, we don't have definite information, and we are not going to blame or to guess.
The Palestinian representative for the PLO here in the United States has said that there is absolutely no clue, there's no indication that any Palestinians were involved in this attack. Do you agree with him? Do you believe him?
I think it's a day for the Palestinians to take the opportunity and divorce terror from their own midst. It will help them. Let them go back. Let us come back to the table of negotiations. With terror, nothing will be achieved, because it doesn't matter who is just responsible for this case. Everybody who is engaged in terror is endangering humanity, is endangering normal life. And we have to really combine forces, because until now, you know, we have had armies without enemies. Now we have dangers without an army, without a strategy. We have to get ourselves organized globally, because terror is global, and bring an end to this terrible form.
Mr. Peres, did you have any word through your intelligence service that there was an attack coming on the United States? Did you have any sign?
Not specifically. And any information we would have, we would hand it over immediately. As we just now send our rescue team from the Army. We have one of the best in the world. They're on their way to the United States to participate and see if we can be of any help to save even a single life. We have also announced that tomorrow it will be a day of mourning for all the Israelis, because, as I told you.
Shimon Peres speaking to us live from Israel. We thank you, sir, very much for your time.
Let's go now to outside Pittsburgh, where our correspondent Steve Goldblatt is. Jeff Goldblatt is standing by at the site of that crash of the. Jeff, it's a United Airlines plane. It's believed to be at that site outside Pittsburgh, isn't it?
That's exactly right, John, with 45 people total on board. And one of the more profound things today, the imprint of terrorism seared not only on Wall Street, but also on Main Street. Here you have an area 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh, and this plane, which went down at about 10 o'clock this morning. We have rescue vehicles that came in earlier in the day, and they have turned up nothing. No one believed to be alive from this crash. Some of the media just getting back to the scene, which is about a quarter of a mile up on a hill back behind me, and so some of the first pictures just starting to come in within the last hour. I want to get quickly to Chris Kanicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate of Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire. Just a couple of people walking around. They look like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long, and probably about 10 feet long, or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around, broken trees.
You're more familiar with this area than I am, being from Chicago. The Somerset County Airport, it's just about 80, just a little ways away from here. Do planes typically go across this area, as far as you know?
Commercial jets usually fly across this area, but they're usually up probably 30,000 feet.
Okay, Chris Kanicki, thanks so much for that insight. We're here, John and Linda, throughout the afternoon and evening, and we'll be providing you updates. We're expecting Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge to be here shortly in press conferences throughout the evening. Now back to you in New York.
Jeff Goldblatt, we thank you very much. We have new footage coming in of the terrorist attack on the Pentagon. Firefighters still trying to fight the flames. This was part of, as you know, part of the outer ring. The E ring is what it's called, where the plane went down. It was actually a United Airlines flight, and it was near the helipad. It destroyed several layers of the building, and fire spread actually from the outer ring to some of the inner rings. However, we should make it clear that the Secretary of Defense is still there. He's still able to work. He's still able to coordinate with the Vice President and the National Security Advisor, who are in a secure facility inside the White House. The Military Command Center in the basement is still functioning. They're coordinating military response. So a significant portion of the Pentagon, a symbol of military strength, has been severely damaged. However, the nucleus of the Pentagon still operates.
Linda, we go from the Pentagon to New York again. World Trade Center number 7 on fire. This is the one that David Lee Miller told us a little while ago has been on fire as a result of the crashes and the collapse of the 2 towers, and is now in danger of collapse itself. It would be, the fire officials believe that if it does become so unstable that it collapses, it would collapse to the south in Manhattan, where the towers collapsed to the north by and large. And so we're keeping an eye on World Trade Center number 7, which is down in the immediate area of the two trade towers which collapsed. All this a result, of course, of 2 commercial airliners who were hijacked and then flown into the World Trade Center towers this morning about 9 a.m. It took an hour for those trade centers to just crumble, fall apart, and collapse. And still, no really good idea of how many of the 50,000 people that work in those 2 towers managed to get out. Not quite clear. And simple logic tells you that they probably all didn't, and that there must be a very, very large number of people who died in that collapse. Linda?
Back to the Washington angle of this, as we have reported, President Bush currently in the air. He's on his way back to the White House. He will join his National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, and the Vice President in a secure facility at the White House. They will be coordinating with the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who is at the Pentagon at this hour. There is also a National Military Command Center working.
The time is now 1:55 on the West Coast. We want to interrupt national coverage for just a bit in order to bring you the latest developments locally. First off, SeaTac Airport, we're just getting word, opening at 9 a.m. tomorrow. That is an update from what we earlier thought.
In the last 25 minutes, we have learned also that the Pierson-King County Urban Search and Rescue Team will depart from McChord Air Force Base at 5 o'clock our time today. The 65-member team is expected to be there for about a week. They are, of course, flying to New York City to help with the rescue efforts at the World Trade Center. We need to head down to the newsroom right now and check in with Christy Paulus for the latest on closures and scheduled changes. Go ahead, Christy.
Sam and Christine, in addition to that new information, we have also just learned that here in the Seattle area, Mayor Paul Schell is planning a press conference at 3 o'clock this afternoon to discuss Seattle's response to the terrorist attacks in New York. Many buildings have been shut down in the Seattle area, including the Space Needle, the Bank of America Tower, the federal courthouse. So we will learn what's going to be happening later on throughout the evening, and we'll bring you that as we attend that press conference. We have also received word, as you mentioned, that SeaTac will now open tomorrow at 9, not 7, as previously noted, and that 9 is what we are learning right now. That also could change. There are reports out of Canada that Vancouver International has allowed about 24 flights that were supposed to land at SeaTac and other Western airports to land in Vancouver. So if you were expecting a flight in, your friends and family could be in Vancouver at this hour. If you are driving north, the Canadian border, we understand, is very backed up. There is extra security at the Canadian border, and Border Patrol are checking cars very thoroughly. If it is the unfortunate circumstance that you're trying to get information about a loved one in New York City, we have a phone number for you. There is a hotline number you can call, 1-800-253-9276. The number there on your screen, if you have a friend or family member in Manhattan, they're trying to hook people up, gather information about people who may have been in that building, and that is where you may be able to get some information. We'll keep you updated as the day goes on.
All right, thank you very much, Christy Paulus. Aviation expert Jim Nance, of course, is in Tacoma. And he's going to join us right now and talk a little bit more about what happened here. Hi, Jim. Can you hear us?
It's John Nance. Yeah,
I'm sorry, John. I apologize. It's been a crazy day here, as you can imagine, and all of us are just a little bit off today. First of all, let's just ask, how do 4 airplanes get hijacked in this country? Do you have any idea how this might happen?
Well, we don't know the mechanism, but we know that whatever it was probably identical in each case. It was somewhere after takeoff. We probably have terrorists here. Of course, they were suicidal. They intended that to be part of the process. They had to be trained to fly an airplane, at least, and maybe even trained on this specific model of aircraft. There's no way of knowing at the moment. My speculation, and it is nothing but wild speculation at this point, but I'm one of 29,000 airline pilots, and you could put a gun to any of our heads, and we're not going to fly into the World Trade Center or the Pentagon or anywhere else. After all, we'd be killing ourselves if we did that. We're going to fight them. Now, if you're planning something like this and you don't want to have a couple of them work and a couple of them not work, you put your own people in there and you kill the pilots that are there. And I'm pretty sure that that's what happened. We do know that in the case of the one that crashed outside of Pittsburgh, that there was somebody talking on a cell phone from the back of the airplane, and the initial indications there are that there was apparently a raid on the cockpit, or I'm not sure which jetliner this was of the 4, but there was a report, as one flight attendant called in from one of the ones that hit the World Trade Center, that there had been a hijacking, that they were breaking into the cockpit, and that they had stabbed 2 flight attendants. And this may be the stabbing aspect, the explanation of how weapons were brought on board this airplane, because they may not have been firearms.
John, they're concerned this morning that this may have been an intelligence failure on the part of the Bush administration by receiving no earlier warning of these attacks. What is your take on that?
Well, let's go back to one thing we've learned in aviation safety, and this is important to remember at this point. If we indulge in nothing but finger-pointing, even to the intelligence community at this point, and start asking who's wrong rather than what's wrong, we're going to miss a lot of things here. We need to take this apart bit by bit, as horrific as it is, and try to find out everything that contributed to this. And certainly the intelligence community is a part of it.
John, let me ask you this also. Now what does the Bush administration do? Because they're still trying to secure who it is that actually is responsible for this, and until then, no retaliatory action can take place, right?
Retired CIA Chief Jim Woolsey, I think, said it best a little while ago. He said, if this is state terrorism and we find that out, it puts it in a completely different realm, then something very corporal will be done. If it's not state terrorism, then it's a different matter, and it's going to be much more difficult.
So, John, all of us who travel through airports go through those security checkpoints.
That's right.
And I would imagine every person who's watching TV right now thinks to themselves, you know what, it's not that secure, is it?
No, it's not that secure. It never has been.
What do we do, John, to make sure that our airlines are safe, that this does not happen again? I would imagine there have to be some pretty big changes.
Look, let me put it this way. It's really important to understand this. We have a free society. We have a very robust air transportation system. If we want to keep it that way, we have to accept a certain level of risk. As horrific as that sounds on this particular day at this particular hour, can we harden things up? Yes, we can. Can we stop playing pretend games about the type of screening we have at airports and really do a good job, federalize those employees, put them on standards? Yes, we can do that, and we should, because those folks are there to keep the nuts away, and they've done a moderately good job of that, but they need to be standardized. But can we harden the system up like El Al to where nothing like this could ever happen again? Not unless we want only 20% of the air traffic in the United States.
John, we just mentioned that SeaTac is open for business again at 9 a.m. tomorrow at the earliest. From your perspective, in your experience, can you tell us, I mean, none of us can really guess because the FAA has never issued a complete national ground stop like this before. What can travelers expect to see tomorrow morning as we head back to the skies?
I wish I could tell you. I don't know, but I do know this. Nationally, and I'm sure this goes all the way to the White House, all the way to the President, we've got to know how this happened in terms of how these people got aboard this aircraft, or these 4 aircraft, before the system can get back in the air.
John Dunn, thank you very much, aviation expert from Tacoma. We really appreciate your insight this morning, sir.
Thank you.
That was John Nance, aviation expert, and now we go to Congresswoman Jennifer Dunn, who is standing by on the phone with us. Good morning. I mean, good afternoon, Congresswoman.
Hi, Christine.
You can imagine it's been a long day. I know. What were you going through?
Well, right now I'm sitting in a very isolated congressional office. Some of the members have come back to our offices. We had a lot of work that we couldn't get done this afternoon. Our staffs generally are not with us. They're in a safer place. I'm looking out the window of my office. I'm staring right at the Capitol. It's an amazing scene because there's nobody there. The flag has not yet been lowered to half-mast. That's amazing. Usually it happens immediately. And in fact, you know, they're doing it right now, but how many hours later is this? So somebody over there has finally brought the flag down to half-mast, but there are nothing but policemen scattered all over as far as I can see. It's a strange, surreal outlook, a beautiful, sunny, blue sky afternoon, unusual sort of Seattle summer weather today here.
Representative Dunn, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the security in this country. There were reports that the plane that possibly hit the Pentagon maybe had buzzed the state or the national capital. How secure do you feel? You were right in the middle of it.
Well, you know, we would not have come back to this office if we didn't feel some sense of distance from the Capitol. It's about a block and a half away from me, but every now and then I look out the window and hope I don't see anything streaking through this beautiful blue sky at the Capitol. But we are told that we're to wait before we go into the Capitol building, and we're going to wait until tomorrow morning. Everything's been put off. They want to take their dogs through. They want to make sure that every nook and cranny has been investigated. The Capitol is such a strong symbol of this country, and what this group, whoever this group is, and we haven't defined yet our enemy, is doing is it's striking symbolic locations. It's much like Pearl Harbor was. The difference is these are not members of the military who are being targeted. Symbols of the United States, our free way of thinking, and people who are civilians and certainly shouldn't be involved in any kind of a political debate. I just learned, unfortunately, that a very good friend of mine, Barbara Olson, was on that plane that struck the Pentagon. That's a tough one.
It is very hard.
And I'm sure there'll be many more. We'll all know some of these people.
You know, we were just talking about that earlier. This is the old 6 degrees of separation issue.
Yeah, I know. It will be.
And it's an even smaller circle than that with all of the people that are involved in this. Let me ask you this. The president's in an undisclosed place. So is the First Lady. We also understand that the top leaders of Congress have been led to a safer location in order to gather and figure out what to do. What should we expect the leaders or see our leaders do about this situation in the coming days?
What we've done is we have had a conference call with our top leaders, Minority Leader Gephardt, Speaker of the House Denny Hastert. Others in our top leadership are, as you say, sequestered together. And tomorrow at 10 o'clock we will open up the Capitol. We'll go to the floor of the House. Maybe the Senate will be doing the same thing, and we'll debate a resolution. I don't know what the wording of it is yet, but people can put their ideas together. I'd be interested in some ideas. And we're going to talk about this incident, what we need to do. Every member of Congress has his or her own take on it, but mostly it's just the most horrible declaration of war on the United States, something that we must react to. I was so pleased when President Bush came on in a very calm statement, but a very strong statement. Do not worry, we will respond. That's important for us to know about.
Representative Dunn, the level of anger in this country will multiply as the days go on here, and somebody is going to want retaliation. I mean, that's just a natural reaction to all of us. Osama bin Laden is a name that keeps getting kicked around. What should America do right now if we find out that it is indeed Osama bin Laden, or if we do find out who's responsible? Are we at war?
I think it's a declaration of war. Yeah. And but I say immediately people should harness that anger. I know exactly how it feels. I feel that way right now too, and I think we should use it in a creative way. I think we should wait until we have discovered who the enemy is. I think we should follow President Bush's commitment that we will respond. I believe we should do it in the way the United States does best after we discover the enemy. We should be very laser-like and make him pay. It should be the kind of retribution that says, don't ever take us for granted or try to accost us in the way that you have today. Don't ever do this again. I think we're going to be aided a lot by our allies around the world because many of them have had these incidents occur. For us, it's the first time we've seen a coordinated terrorist action. But we all know how great it is to have freedom in our nation, and this is the price we're paying. And so we must, in our very, very most effective way, whether it's by putting more human intelligence into those Middle East nations or other nations like North Korea, finding out what's going to happen ahead of time. It's tough to control this sort of violence. It's different from anything we've ever viewed before, and it's basically what Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld has been saying to us over the last few months. We must redesign our military so we can respond to things like terrorism. Now we know firsthand that we must prepare for this. I think people in this country who are very angry have good reason to be, but we should not respond until we know who the enemy is, and not against people that we just assume are part of this. We'll know soon enough.
And also very disrupting and difficult to watch also the video that we just saw while you were talking, which is of the Palestinians half a world away celebrating over the actions that have been taken on our soil today. Congresswoman Jennifer Dunn, a Republican from Bellevue, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very
this
much, ma'am.
afternoon, excuse me. There have also been prayer services that have been happening in our area. People have been lining up around the block in many area blood donation spots to go ahead and give blood. The need is so dire at this point.
So if you would like to help out, you can head down to your local blood bank and donate blood. They're particularly looking for blood type O. One other note we want to let you know, there's the full screen right now. I want to pop this up for you. This is an 800 number that you can call for donation sites, 1-800-398-7888, or you can go to www.psbc.org. One final note, the president, we are told, is headed back from Nebraska, where he had been, on his way to Washington, D.C., and the word is that he will address the nation at some point in time over the course of the next 6 to 8 hours.
Search and rescue crews from western Washington are on their way to New York City. We will keep track of those developments and much more. This has been a special report from KCPQ Seattle, Tacoma, Everett. Now back to national coverage.
This morning, a short while later, one tower collapsed, then another. This now home video footage we want to show you.
I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm just getting a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you.
It is a terrifying scene. We are told by those who operate the World Trade Center that this morning, shortly before 9 a.m. Eastern Time, when the first plane slammed into one of the towers, that the building was at full capacity, meaning that somewhere around 50,000 people were inside those two towers. We don't know a number yet of how many people were hurt. There you see the second plane slamming into the second tower. It did not take long for a chain reaction of events, including a massive fire inside each tower, to occur, and then one tower collapsed, then the other. Now we know that part of the World Trade Center complex, Building 7, is also on fire at this hour. It is in danger of collapse. We have a correspondent there. We will be checking with him. There is also a tremendous disaster all around Lower Manhattan. 10,000 or more emergency rescue personnel have been brought in. They've been called in. All taxi cabs in New York City have been commandeered to ferry rescue workers down to that area. At the same time, the Navy has dispatched a number of ships to New York Harbor to help with the rescue operation. Hospital emergency rooms around the city and beyond, completely in chaos.
We are going to go momentarily to a former ambassador to NATO, but before we go to Ambassador Robert Hunter, let me introduce on the phone Kelly Quill, who was an eyewitness to both Kelly Quayle. I'm sorry, Kelly.
Coyle.
Coyle. Kelly Coyle. You saw both planes hit both towers, and you saw both towers come down. Tell me about it.
I went to work this morning. I worked for Solomon Smith Barney, and we're located at 7 World Trade, and I'm on the 43rd floor. And we were just sitting there today, and we saw the first plane hit the building. And at that point, I really did not know what was going on. It didn't look like an accident because it looked like it was a direct, that they were aiming it right at the World Trade Center. But then there seemed to be like explosions, so people didn't really know. There was a lot of debris hitting the windows. People panicked, but they stayed put. And originally I thought that we stayed put for about 5 minutes, and then the second attack hit. but now I find out that it was actually 18 minutes. So it's funny, you know, how time flies.
Okay, now, Kelly, plane number 1 hits, plane number 2 hits, and then there's a lot of fire. And
mass hysteria, people running down the stairs, just trying to get out.
Kelly, I apologize for breaking in. Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, now speaking about the terrorist attacks. Let us go there now.
Assistance at any time. The government of Israel has declared a day of mourning tomorrow as we bow our heads and share in the sorrow of the American people. תודה רבה לכם.
All right, it was very brief, but you got the essential message there from Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, basically saying it stands with the United States, and in a show of solidarity tomorrow. In the state of Israel, there will be a national day of mourning.
Ambassador Robert Hunter joins us now. He is the former ambassador to NATO. He's now with the RAND Corporation. Ambassador Hunter, we are, you know, we keep hearing people say, we've got to figure out who did this. We've got to figure out who did this. And they said that after the Oklahoma City bombing, and it turned out to be something much different than what people expected. In this case, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a Tim McVeigh behind this, does it? It does seem to be a either state-sponsored or quasi-state-sponsored act of terrorism, doesn't it?
Well, the marking so far is that this was a foreign group, but it could very well have been Osama bin Laden, with money from various places, but it didn't necessarily require a state to do this. I think the essential thing that's happened with this tragedy today is whoever did it didn't realize who they're dealing with. This is a day that will live in infamy. This is like another Pearl Harbor, in which we're already seeing today the extraordinary way in which the American people across the country, and certainly here in Washington, certainly in New York, have been pulling together. And I think whoever did this is going to regret this dearly.
Okay, but what does that mean? I mean, we pull together as a country, we stand united, we stand tall, we go on, we do all that. But there is a tight-jawed anger and demand for something serious to be done. What do you think that will be?
And I think it will have to be done. One reason I think the government have been so cautious today was precisely what you said that happened in Oklahoma City, where a lot of people got it wrong. A lot of people had to be involved in what happened today, going through 4 airports and hijacking the planes, being able to direct them the way they were, choosing planes that were full of fuel for the greatest impact. This will come out if we have any intelligence capability at all, and at that point, just as the Japanese found after Pearl Harbor, the United States will have to use whatever power it can to bring these people to justice or to take direct military action against them. There's no more ifs, ands, or buts about that. And I think the nation, this government, opposition, everybody together, I think, is united on that point. And those who did it are going to be brought to justice.
Ambassador Robert Hunter, former ambassador to NATO, now with the RAND Corporation, thanks very much for your view. Let me go back to Linda Vester. We have a live picture from down near World Trade Center number 7, I think, Linda.
And just a reminder, President Bush is due to address the nation live via national television a little bit later this evening. With us once again, former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger. Mr. Eagleburger, we heard just a short while ago, Shimon Peres of Israel said that they had no advanced warning. They have an extensive intelligence network. They had no specific advanced warning that this kind of an attack was coming. The United States has the NSA, it has the CIA, it has the DIA, and the FBI. How is it that these sophisticated agencies could not get advanced warning of an attack?
Well, I think there are any number of reasons for that. First of all, this clearly is a sophisticated operation, very sophisticated, very professional. I suspect that it was kept in the hands of very few people and that they are extremely dedicated, and they simply didn't leak. I shouldn't say it's simple. It's not. Under normal circumstances, you would have thought that we would have been able to get some intelligence on it. But if they are really as competent as they seem to be, and as as careful as they seem to have been, I could understand why we couldn't get information on it. I don't like that fact, but I at the same time can't feel terribly upset because we didn't, because in cases like this, often we don't get these things.
You know, we were listening to James Baker, your colleague, and
Right.
He was saying earlier that he thought that perhaps the United States government needed to revisit this this law, I believe it is, that does not allow the United States to assassinate an individual, even if the United States has definitive information that a certain individual had something to do with a massive loss of life.
I must say to you, ma'am, I have believed for a very long time that it was wrong. It was during President Ford's administration, I think, when the executive order was issued. I have thought for a very long time that ought to be eliminated. We ought to be able to carry out the kinds of activities necessary under really circumstances like this. We ought to be able to do what's necessary to protect our country now.
Well, I
it
may
ought
be
to
getting...
be very carefully constructed so that it can't happen all the time, but I very much believe we ought to change it.
Well, I may be getting a little ahead of myself here, but how exactly would that be reversed if there is a decision that executive order really no longer applies in this current terrorist world?
I think the answer to that is if the president issued the executive order, another president can issue a second executive order removing the first one. It doesn't take that much, frankly.
You know, Mr. Eagleberger,
yeah.
I thought that maybe it's not something the United States has the ability to monitor in real time, but looking back, isn't essentially every phone call on the planet recorded by some national security agency? Can't we go back and look at who Osama bin Laden or any of these people were talking to anytime they were talking to?
Well, I'm sure that if...
Do we have that capability?
I think, as a matter of, they certainly have the capability, and to go back and look at it, I suspect, is going on right now. But, you know, again, here we are, thousands and thousands of phone calls. It's not easy to pick up, but it's a lot easier to pick it up after the fact than before it. There's no question about that.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that even if we don't have the real-time intelligence, or we have not spent the money necessary to have, as you put it earlier, the messy business of spies, do we have the capability of going back in sort of a forensic fashion and figuring out who did what?
We may well have. Again, it's going to depend to a great degree on how closed-mouthed these people were. If they were as professional as they seem to be, it may well be that there is no evidence. But on the other hand, there is also no question that you can go back and not quickly necessarily, but you can very often establish precisely the kind of information you're looking for when you know what's already happened, but you can't do it beforehand.
Mr. Eagleberger, hold on just a second. Richard Shelby, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, is speaking now in Washington. Let's listen in.
Families that were lost today, and we should be, but we've got to realize that this is a wake-up call for America. A lot of us have been talking about terrorism, counterterrorism, how to deal with it. We live in an open society, and we're not going to live in a bunker, and we shouldn't. And I'll see what goes on in this meeting in here, but I think the bottom line is we were basically caught flat-footed, and we've lost a lot of people, and that's sad.
Who's responsible, Senator?
Well, I'm not here to blame anybody. I'm just here to say that we've got to do better.
Based on what you were told today by First Lieutenant and based on your briefings in the past, do you think it was been Laden?
I can't say that, but a lot of things point to it. It was either, I would think it would either be Osama bin Laden's cell or some other cell similar to it or kin to it or spin-off from it. But I can't say that yet. Maybe later today there'll be some more specific information.
Insofar as some of the terrorist groups have made a point of criticizing American policy towards Israel, is it...
Let me interrupt right here. Richard Shelby talking. Building 7, the World Trade Center number 7, has collapsed. It was expected to go, and it finally has. So that is 3 buildings in New York City that have collapsed in today's terror attacks.
We should clarify that Building 7 was not struck with anything. This is actually part of a chain reaction that began when the two towers of the World Trade Center were hit by those two commercial airliners, caught on fire and then collapsed. So this is part of the chain reaction, simply as it continued to sort of devastate buildings around the area in Lower Manhattan. Once again, this is basically a state of emergency in Lower Manhattan as they try to rush rescue personnel to the scene.
And down there, standing beside our camera, is our correspondent David Lee Miller. David, fill us in. David Lee Miller, can you hear me?
Let's go, please. Back it up.
Let's go. All right, they're telling our correspondent David Lee Miller to get out. So as we watch the Trade Center building number 7 collapsing, and the police are moving the camera crews, get out, get out, get out. Let me there's still more live pictures of this. Let me speak to Richard Septmeyer, who joins us. He is a frequent guest on Neil Cavuto's show, and is in one of the buildings down there. Richard, is that your building, the one that just collapsed?
No, we're in 59 Maiden Lane, which is right opposite the Federal Reserve.
And you had to walk down, what, 32 flights?
Right.
Could you tell, because we've all been trying to figure out, of the 50,000 people who work in those two towers that collapsed, could you look out on the street and make a judgment as to whether a significant number of them managed to get out?
It's hard to believe that a significant number of them could have gotten out. Maybe in the 18 minutes between crashes, maybe some of them got out of the second
How long did it
building.
take you to walk down 32 flights?
I took it slow, obviously, and when I got down, I took a nice big drink of water, and I thank God that I'm alive, particularly since we almost moved to that building a few months ago.
There goes the building. There's a picture of the building collapsing just moments ago. We finally got the tape in. That is Trade Center building number 7. It was involved, I guess you would call it collateral damage here, from the original collapse and fires of the two Trade Center towers, and moments ago, our fire department here in New York lost it, and it collapsed. Richard, I'm just trying to get a couple of, how long did it take you to walk down 32 flights? We're trying to judge how long it would have taken somebody on the 80th floor of the tower to get out of the building before it collapsed.
Now, a lot of people passed me because I'm a big guy, so I wanted to walk slowly going down 32 flights. It took me about 20 minutes because they already had the doors locked down on where I had to get out.
Richard, also, if I can jump in, just so people understand who was in the World Trade Center, there are some small offices that nobody might recognize, but then again, there are also companies that a lot of people recognize. I mean, from everywhere from Avis, car rental, to Lehman Brothers, the investment house, to Delta Airlines. Who else?
Well, Morgan Stanley has quite a few floors, like 10%, and Cantor Fitzgerald is on the upper part of the first building that was hit, and that's an interdealer broker with screened prices, and I've known them for 30 years. I'm going to be very sad when I see the list of people who didn't make it out of the building. It's going to be the next time I break tears, I think, with this situation.
Richard, we're talking about 10,000 people as just a rough guess.
It's got to be more than that.
You think? Okay, Richard Septmeyer, thanks a lot. Hold on just a second. Let me go now to Senator Chuck Hagel, who has been conferring today in D.C. about this horrible day of infamy, perhaps not just a day of infamy, but the day of infamy. Senator Hagel, has the State Department got any clue what happened today?
Nobody does, John, except to say this was a very sophisticated effort. I think we all recognize that. Resources, intelligence, people that came together in a very precise project and effort to do this terrible, terrible terrorist act. That's what we do know. Now, we will unfold this, and we will pull it apart, and we will get the facts. And when we get those facts, there will be punishment. But right now, what we must do is what we are doing, in fact, is securing our country and all our national security interests, helping those we need to help, pray for the families and those loved ones who have been lost, and then we've got a lot of work to do ahead of us, John.
Senator Hagel, if I can ask you to just stand by with us for 1 second. We need to quickly get a report from correspondent David Lee Miller on the collapse of building number 7 of the World Trade Center. David? David Lee Miller.
Chaotic. Just a few moments ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. Earlier, we had been warned by firefighting sources that the building was in danger of collapse. Engineers were on the scene. They say the building was structurally very weak. It was in flames. It was on fire since this morning. And just a few moments ago, the entire building gave way. From my vantage point on Reed Street in Lower Manhattan, it appears the building fell south, which is the opposite direction that the Twin Towers fell. This had been predicted throughout the afternoon, and it had prevented a number of emergency workers from getting close to the scene. Nevertheless, up until a few moments ago, we saw a virtual parade of emergency vehicles on their way downtown. Suddenly and without warning, the building gave way. Everything came to a standstill. A huge plume of smoke went into the air and began to barrel northerly in our direction. The police asked us to move our live truck and our cameras and lights and equipment, and we, the authorities, literally fled about a block and a half north to stay out of harm's way, and we're watching the smoke slowly continue to move in our direction, not knowing if this is going to cause any further injuries. I believe that building, as I said, was empty at this time because authorities knew that it was very, very much in danger of collapse, and things went the way that the authorities feared. Back to you.
And David, just to clarify, that building number 7 is much smaller than the 2 towers that we saw collapsing this morning.
That's absolutely right. I don't know how many floors it is, but in comparison to the World Trade Towers, excuse me here, it looks almost like a mid-rise building, but it was an important building to the city of New York. It had a number of important city offices, including an emergency operations center of some type, and it's going to make the cleanup down here yet even more difficult. Because to put all this in perspective, Linda, as you and I both know, what we have here really is a city. You've got 50,000 people that work in these buildings every day. Many Americans don't live in communities that are that big, and the damage here is just devastating.
David, before I let you go back to Senator Hagel, just quickly, has there been any progress in getting into the area of the 2 towers to start looking for people in there?
Yeah, I asked one of the firefighters that, and we're not allowed close to the actual tower site, what was once the World Trade Towers. I'm told that they're trying at this hour to get to those who may be trapped in the rubble, but it is extremely, extremely difficult. So to what, if any extent, they're able to pull people out of the rubble at this time, we really don't know for sure, but I can tell you that it's going to be a very, very long night here.
All right, David Lee Miller with us live from New York City. And back to Senator Chuck Hagel. Senator Hagel, you probably have access to more detailed information about what happened this morning than we do. Have you been briefed on what the FAA knew about hijackings before the actual attacks on the building? Because we've heard that the FAA had early information of a hijacking in progress.
I am not aware of any of that specific information. We've been briefed, some of us, throughout the day. I just spoke to the Acting Secretary of State, Rich Armitage, a couple of minutes ago. As you know, Secretary Powell is on his way back from Latin America. And so we've gotten periodic updates, but no one has been able to put all the pieces yet together. We will, but not yet.
Senator Hagel, you know, I hate to sound like I'm obsessing on this, but I just think that we can't lose sight of it for a moment. The huge number of people that undoubtedly died here. Won't there be an almost unstoppable cry for a pound, if not a ton, of flesh over this?
John, no nation can allow this kind of cowardly terrorist act of this enormity, this immensity, as you mentioned, to go unpunished. We will get the facts. We will be sure of those facts. And when we have those facts, we will do something about it. Now, one of the things that might come out of this, John, is a new coalition of the civilized world focusing, putting the resources on dealing with terrorism. As great a power as the United States is, as we found out today, we can't do this alone. We need all the civilized world with us, and we need to deal with this. This issue, terrorism, is the scourge of our time.
Senator Chuck Hagel, thanks very much for the latest from your vantage point. Let's go now to Rear Admiral Eric McVaden of the Institute for Policy Analysis, who joins us from Washington. Mr. McVaden, we all want to know who, how, why, and what to do about it. Where can you start?
Well, I think you identified just exactly the problem. Of course, a lot of people are asking, so how do we strike back? How do we both defend the U.S.? And by the way, I don't think we've seen F-16s and F-15s flying over the Washington area like this ever in my lifetime.
Nor over downtown Manhattan, I'll remind you.
Indeed. But what I think we're looking at, and in the coalition that Senator Hagel spoke of, is an intelligence challenge, and maybe we need that sort of concerted effort among all of the civilized world there. But I think we have an intelligence challenge now at two levels. First, just exactly as you described it, to say who did it, but then to be able to determine whether there are going to be future attacks or what future threats are.
Well, Admiral, there's two approaches to this. You figure out who, and then you say, do we take the cuddly approach? Why are they mad at us, and how can we make them happy with us? Or do we take the opposite approach and say, we hit them hard, make them so frightened of ever doing such a thing again that it doesn't happen? What's the approach?
Well, I don't know what the approach is because you've identified the dilemma exactly. And, you know, let me describe it in terms that the Chinese often do with me in North Korea. And so what you should do is be able to get along with the North Koreans better, and you'd eliminate the threat. Well, that's much easier said than done. I think it's a balance between the two, and that we'll have to cope with that for all the time that I can foresee.
Admiral Linda Vester with you as well. Just a question about what it means that the Pentagon and actually, as we understand, naval forces along the entire East Coast are under threat con Delta. Can you explain?
Well, that's simply going to the highest state of alert so that we attempt to both be ready to cope with anything, but also for force protection means, and so that we ensure that we do not get yet another very unpleasant surprise.
Right. So we have multiple Navy ships now dispatched, some of them to the New York Harbor to help with the rescue. How much training do those aboard those ships have for this kind of incident?
Well, of course, I've heard that there might be a hospital ship that's going, and so that would certainly have something there. But, yes, people are trained to cope with emergencies and so forth, but I guess I take some pleasure, if there could be any such thing derived in this kind of situation, to know that once again the country looks around and says, where are our aircraft carriers? So it makes me proud of my years in the U.S. Navy.
Yeah.
All right, Rear Admiral Eric McFadden, thanks very much for joining us. You may want to stay on the line and listen to this. We're going now to our senior correspondent in Washington, Rita Cosby, who has new information on the possible Osama bin Laden connection. Rita.
Yeah, John, I just got off the phone with two law enforcement sources, and they are telling me that they are getting strong indications that Osama bin Laden and his organization of al-Qaeda, which is based in Afghanistan, along with bin Laden, may be behind this attack. What's interesting is that they're saying, my sources, are that they have strong indicators. They would not say specifically what those indicators are, but they're saying it's much more than just speculation, when a lot of people have believed that bin Laden may have been tied just because he had the financial resources to do this, the capability, the widespread network all over the globe. But my sources are telling me that in addition to just the obvious, that they are getting some severe and very strong indicators pointing in that direction. They're saying that at this point it is not enough to be, to go right out and say that they definitely did that, but they're saying that they are almost to the point where they are almost certain that they are behind this attack.
Rita, if I can ask you a question about this, we don't know any details, but we're all making a fairly informed estimate that it was not the scheduled pilot that flew these planes into the trade towers or the Pentagon. Who in Osama bin Laden's world can train people to fly 757s?
Well, there are actually a number of them, frighteningly, and in fact, intelligence sources were telling me earlier today that they actually have a couple of training grounds right there in Afghanistan where they are training suicide bombers for planes, i.e. 737, 757, 767s, also private planes, and also other types of bombing attacks. And, of course, intelligence sources firmly believe he's been behind the USS Cole attack. That was where a small boat pulled up alongside the USS Cole and it exploded. But they said that they have gotten some intelligence information that he was indeed training people on some American commercial jetliners, and that he was capable of doing this. And in fact, I remember around the time of the Millennium strikes, remember all the preparations that were being made and the strikes that were thwarted by U.S. officials at that point, there was in the mix the possibility that there might be multiple hijackings on U.S. soil, and it would have involved some Algerians with ties to Osama bin Laden. So this is something that the U.S. government was aware that Osama bin Laden had been training for, at least in some sort of capability. No one I've spoken to today ever anticipated that it would actually happen. They all seem to be taken very much by surprise that something would have happened on U.S. soil. But they certainly did know that he was training individuals. And also law enforcement sources also tell me that they, in addition to this, saw some activity around bin Laden's camp in the last 2 weeks. And this was the same type of activity that we were reporting right around the time of the possible Millennium strikes, that they saw increased activity around his camps, where he was sending out some of his leaders, the ones right below him, to sort of delegate to other surrogates around the globe. What happens with Osama bin Laden, his network is so widespread that normally it's about 4 or 5, sometimes 6 or 7 layers away from him are the actual individuals who carry out the attacks, and often they don't know who they're carrying out the attacks for. So they try to keep it so Osama bin Laden, it doesn't point directly to him. He never claims responsibility for his acts, and they seem to think the same thing may have taken place here. But indeed, right before the Millennium attacks, they certainly saw a lot of activity around his camp. Some of his key men were being dispatched to different locations around the globe, and they said that indeed they did see at least some activity around his camps in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, and some indications. Another thing we reported earlier today, on June 20th of this year, Osama bin Laden's followers released a videotape of Osama bin Laden saying that he's going to hit them where it hurts, and he talked about hitting targets in U.S., also and in Israel. So there were some indications that he was going to go after his followers, rather go after his enemies, and go after them with a vengeance. But now I'm being told, John, from law enforcement sources that it is much more than just sort of the sense that he was capable of carrying out this attack, that he had obviously the financial resources, certainly the infrastructure around the globe, but that they are getting strong indicators pointing in that direction. Right now, not 100%, but getting strong indicators pointing there.
Rita Cosby, if you would stand by, we have more information coming in. We've gotten word that there's a convoy of military vehicles in Washington, D.C., passing through the section of Washington known as Georgetown, working their way west, headed towards Georgetown. No indication as to what exactly they're planning to do, but that just coming in, being confirmed. Also, President Bush is due to speak to the nation a little bit later tonight. At this moment, he is in the air, heading back to Washington from Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. That is where he stopped. He touched down. He held a National Security Council meeting via telephone, and then he gave this statement before getting back on the plane and heading to Washington. Take a look.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President George W. Bush now on his way to Washington, D.C. He will address the nation a little bit later tonight. The time to be determined, but you will see it here live on the Fox News channel.
Linda, the president talking about the victims. One of the victims we know by name, Barbara Olson, who appeared on this network many times. It is now being reported on the wires that she spoke to her husband, Theodore Olson, twice during the hijacking using her cell phone, and she told her husband that the hijackers were using knife-like instruments, and they further declined to describe the conversation. Barbara Olson killed today in the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Joining me on the phone now, Colonel David Hackworth, America's most decorated living soldier. Colonel Hackworth, America evidently wants to go to war about this. How do we do that?
Well, you know, having lived through Pearl Harbor and remembering that terrible day, and the end result of that is how it galvanized the nation. And I suspect that all Americans will come and stand tall, and will finally get the national security apparatus, that's the generals, the admirals, the president, and all of the people that are responsible for the security of this country, to get their heads out of a very dark place and start waking up. I have for 10 years, John, even on your show we talked about, said the threat is terrorism. In the meantime, we build defense shields to stop missiles and buy more bombs and more aircraft, but not address the problem. While the FBI goes almost barefooted, who are the mainline defenders in this thing, while our intelligence community doesn't get the kind of money and the funding and the backup that they need to do the job to stop terrorism, we're preparing again for a 20th century war in the 21st century.
Colonel Hackworth, are you saying that we should be... hold on, Colonel Hackworth. Hillary Clinton is speaking now. Let's listen to the senator from New York.
I can't wait.
All right, hang
Hillary
on a
and
second,
I are
Colonel.
here today to express our solidarity with the people in New York and America. First, we completely are appalled, shaken, but also resolute as a result of this awful action. This is Pearl Harbor, 21st century, and it's an unknown enemy, although they will be known, attacking civilians. First, to the families of those who may have losses, and so many calls we received today from people who couldn't find loved ones, didn't know where they were. We feel your pain. I know for an hour I couldn't find my daughter, whose high school is in the shadow of the World Trade Center. And praise God, I was able to find her, and she and my wife, who works downtown in New York, and my other daughter are safe. So our first feeling is for the families and the suffering and the pain that goes on in New York and throughout the country. I spoke on behalf of us to the President this afternoon. He wished me to convey to New Yorkers that he will do everything possible to help the rescue and the recovery, and what needs to be done in future years and months, because this loss is just a terrible loss that will not go away soon. He also expressed a second point, which we share, and that is that those who did this must be brought to justice. For too long, the world has just shrugged its shoulders at terrorism. But we now know that none of us as Americans can avoid that terrorism unless we take strong action against it. And I expressed to the President on behalf of both of us and all of the Senate that we stand shoulder to shoulder with him in this fight, that no one will try to seek partisan or geographic or any other advantage. We will be united in this fight, and we will do everything we can. We cannot have a month-long or a year-long fight against terrorism. We have to have a permanent fight against terrorism, because this is the new form of warfare. And so, the few things we ask people: first, for prayers. Second, anyone in America who can, through their local authorities, give blood. We are desperately short of blood. We need doctors who can contact the authorities if they live within a days of New York. We are short of doctors. And of course, FEMA and the urban rescue teams, as many as our nation has, are being sent immediately. America can never turn back from this point. And we are in a new era where we realize the world is an interconnected but sometimes very nasty place. We have to be prepared for it. And so, two things. One, love and caring for those who accepted loss, and help for those who need some path to recovery. And second, resoluteness, that we will never let this happen again, and do everything we can, and some of the steps won't be easy, to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, Chuck and I wish we could be in New York, but that's not possible. And we've been in constant communication with the authorities, with the White House, the governor's office, the mayor's office, with the emergency officials. And I think that it's clear to everyone this was an attack on America. It may have been directed at New York, but it really is attacking everything we stand for in every part of our country. And I'm very proud of the way New Yorkers responded. The behavior of the people on the ground, the emergency resources, our police and firefighters have just been extraordinary, and many of them were put in harm's way because they were doing their job. Our medical facilities, all the hospitals in the immediate area, are overwhelmed. We are moving non-critical patients out of hospitals in the city, out to Long Island, even Westchester, in order to make room for those who have been injured. We do need more blood. We need doctors and nurses and other medical professionals who would be able to support those who are working so tirelessly. We appreciate the federal resources, certainly the search and rescue teams, the National Guard, FEMA. We've been assured we will have everything we need to conduct the various phases of the reaction. First, of course, is to find any who might have survived. Second is to find every body of anyone who has not, to do the hard work of sifting for evidence, and then for the task of rebuilding. This will be a monumental undertaking. This was a nerve center of communications, of infrastructure that affects not just our nation, but the entire world in terms of the access to and transfer of information. We're also deeply concerned about the attack on the Pentagon. We just had a conference call with our Senate leadership, bipartisan, Senators Daschle and Reid and Lott and Nichols. We also heard from Senator Warner. He and Senator Levin are at the Pentagon, where they have gone to do everything they can to support what needs to be done, and they were certainly very confident that our military forces are as alert and ready as they need to be. So there is an enormous amount of very good, solid work being done in New York, in Washington, throughout the country. I would just reiterate, there is absolutely no need for anyone anywhere to panic. This has been carried out in an orderly and effective manner, but we have a lot of work ahead of us, and that work includes the identifying of those who are responsible for this cowardly and evil act and holding them accountable wherever they might be, however long it would take.
We're ready for questions.
Any idea who is responsible for these attacks?
I think they do, and they're not prepared to say yet, but I have spoken to both FBI and CIA today, and they are certainly not clueless.
We step away from...
I don't know, everybody just doesn't know where to go. They won't let, everything is blocked off. You can't even, they're telling us to get out, but there's nowhere to go.
Manhattan and Washington shut down. America closed all its airports, and world leaders began to react.
There have been the most terrible, shocking events taking place in the United States of America within the last hour or so, including 2 hijacked planes being flown deliberately into the World Trade Center. I'm afraid we can only imagine the terror and the carnage there, and the many, many innocent people that will have lost their lives.
Manhattan was in turmoil. New York's go-go mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, was soon on the spot. The damage he saw was epic, and he spoke of a tremendous number of lives lost.
The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear, ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
We don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
And no wonder, while firefighters and policemen were doing their utmost to cope with the collapse of the Trade Center's first tower to rescue people trapped inside, the second tower, mortally wounded by its hijacked airliner, also crumbled to dust. New Yorkers were shell-shocked.
What happened, man? Big boom. Come down the steps, everything fine till we got to the basement, and then everything just fell in. I got trapped in there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, bags all around. Finally, we fought our way out over the rubble.
Yeah.
Come on down. We did all right.
All right, way to be, Tom. Let's go.
A picture of devastation and a terrible reminder of how vulnerable in today's world of terrorism and suicide bombers its dominant power has proved to be. President Bush's expensive dream of a Star Wars missile defense scheme would have been powerless today. Heaven knows what the toll of death and injury will prove to be.
Well, let's speak first of all to Elaine Showalter, who's originally from New Jersey, living here now, but you have family in New York. What went through your mind seeing those pictures again?
Well, it's been a terrifying day that will live in infamy. And I think the worst of it was when it was happening, the very beginning. I was on Oxford Street and trying to think about how long it was going to go on when the reports were coming in, and you couldn't be sure whether there would be attacks in Chicago, Seattle, Pittsburgh, the rest of the country. But I think that Americans recover from these things incredibly fast, and that even by this time the recovery has begun.
You were contacting family and friends in New York yourself?
Yes, mostly by the internet, which is a big help because all the telephone lines are tied up. But we had email, and everybody called back and forth, and messages are coming in, and people are beginning to post all kinds of messages on the net of help and support.
Let's speak to Richard Pearl, who was close to President George Bush Jr., but also was Assistant Secretary of Defense under Ronald Reagan. Mr. Pearl, people have been talking about this today as an act of war. Is that how you see it?
Clearly it's an act of war, both in terms of its magnitude and its purpose. Behind these acts of terror are the states that support terrorism, the states that provide the recruitment, the organization, the sanctuary, the planning, the training, the logistics, the money. This could not happen without state support and state sponsorship, and the United States must now do something it has been reluctant to do, and that is hold the states accountable that permit this kind of terrorism to take place.
Stephen Simon, you are a former member of the U.S. National Security Council. On the point about how this could happen, a lot of people have been saying it ought to be impossible for 4 planes to be hijacked simultaneously in the USA.
Well, it's obviously not. Smuggling weapons onto airplanes in the United States is not an impossible feat. There are a huge number of travelers. They're shoved through hubs that are extremely crowded. It's very difficult under these circumstances for poorly paid and in some cases poorly motivated security personnel to detect every bit of contraband that somebody's trying to smuggle onto an airplane.
But would you ever have thought 4 simultaneous hijacks were possible?
Well, I never would have thought anybody would have attempted it. But clearly you have a group here that is highly motivated, very determined to do this, very well organized, enjoys excellent communications, and probably has some practice.
Ehud Barak is also here, the former Israeli Prime Minister. What did you think, Mr. Barak, watching those pictures again?
I'm not sure that I understood the question.
What was your reaction to what we've just seen?
It's a clear act of war. I believe that Premier Tony Blair put it correctly. It's a time for action, not for just interviews, and a time for action by the whole world community, coordinating a concerted effort on the level of diplomatic economy, but more than anything else, intelligence and operations to launch a full-scale struggle against world terror. It is all our Western civilization is now under attack. No way to ignore it. We know the names of these rogue countries. We know the names of the organizations. The intelligence community know to tell us where they are deployed, and it is a time for action, even if it's going to be a very tough and painful and maybe a struggle that will stretch over a few years.
Were you at all surprised that it could happen?
I was not surprised by the very attempt to destroy the Twin Towers. It already happened. But the combination and simultaneous effect of different places where different kind of airplanes were hijacked at the same time in a coordinated way is quite...
Aircraft fire going up, multiple detonations we can hear in the air. I'll try and be quiet for a moment, see if we can pick up some of those sounds coming in from the perimeter of the city, Joey. Very quiet at this particular moment. The city still trace of fire, rockets going up around the airport, trace of fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going off again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly where the impacts are happening. Certainly, certainly it would appear that the Afghan defense systems have detected a threat in the air. They are launching what appears to be anti-aircraft defense systems at the moment. Certainly I can see that fire that was blazing on the horizon. It was a faint yellow. It's now a bright orange blazing. Several other detonations going off around the city, multiple areas. Rockets appear to be taking off from one end of the airport. I can see that's perhaps located about 8 or 9 miles away from where we stand, Joey.
We want to ask you to please keep your line up to us. We're having difficulty reaching you on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan at this point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent, Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul, the seat of Afghanistan's power, the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at, but you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you hear us?
We're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city, and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, the fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had also made a statement saying that they felt Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for what had happened in the United States. He said his country was a peaceful country. He wanted it to be at peace, and he wanted peace in other countries around the world. Certainly what we're seeing in Kabul these early hours of this Wednesday morning is very far from peace. Certainly multiple explosions happening in and around the city. There is a front line about 50 miles north of the city where the Taliban are fighting a battle against the Northern Alliance here. We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well. but on the perimeter of the city, particularly in the direction of the Kabul airport, which is about 5 to 8 miles from where we are, detonations coming from there. I remember standing on this balcony about 4 years ago watching fighter jets bomb that airport as part of Afghanistan's ongoing civil war. The flash at the airport to us hearing the detonation at the hotel is about the same duration, so I am using that as an estimate to gauge that those missiles again are falling in the area of the airport. First we're seeing the flash, and then we hear the detonation some several seconds afterwards, and they appear to be coming from that airport area, in some cases several miles away from us. There is still a lot of flashing we can see in the air reflected off clouds. That could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere. The flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the Mujahideen infighting in Kabul. The last 5 years, the Taliban have been in control of this city, have been trying to extend their control over and across Afghanistan. And the foreign minister this evening telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism, Joey.
All right, that is CNN's Nick Robertson. Again, please keep the line open to us. Nick Robertson there in Kabul, Afghanistan. For our viewers who are watching this with us on the air, again, we're getting this from video phone technology. You're seeing this exclusively on CNN. It is a very new technology, and so you could tell from the audio line it is not as clear.